I'd like to welcome you this evening to our talk, Wind versus Water. I'm Nancy Tibbs, and our talk is being sponsored tonight by the Friends of Wyndham and our sister organization, Grafton Woodlands Group. We were formed as community groups to try to foster informed discussion of the wind turbine proposal for Grafton and Wyndham. We particularly favor open communication, open conversation, so we hope that you'll feel free and comfortable tonight to ask questions and to air opinions. We're gathered this evening at the confluence of the south and north branches of Saxton's River, which floods Grafton on average about every 7 years. The last flood was in 2011 at a cost of about $5 million. Most of the people in this room are probably familiar with that, but what you may not know is that the south branch of the Saxton's River rises in Wyndham on the Stilesbrook Forest, which is where the proposal for the wind turbines is. Wyndham is about 5 miles, a little over, due west of here, but it's 1,300 feet higher in elevation. And this fact had caused us some consternation when about 4 years ago, the owner of the Stilesbrook Forest, Meadows and Timberlands, an out-of-state landowner, invited Iberdrola, a Spanish multinational, to place wind turbines in the Stilesbrook Forest. We had many concerns about it, but certainly a major one was that this is a flood-prone area. During the 4 years that have ensued, nearly 4 years since the proposal was first put on the table, Iberdrola and the people who support the project have repeatedly told us that the project was actually going to make the flooding aspect of the situation better for us all. And this despite the fact that extensive blasting, excavation, bulldozing, and the paving of 300 acres with various types of impermeable surfaces is what's involved in the project that's being considered. So we might be forgiven for being skeptical about that. It's not that we don't believe that there is such a thing as stormwater controls for high elevation construction. We do believe that. But what we wonder is whether the systems that have been designed actually work. And it's not that we don't believe that the state has permitting and compliance and monitoring systems that they've developed over, great time and with all kinds of smart people working on it. We know such systems have been developed, but what we don't know is, do they work? So we're very fortunate this evening to have with us Jeff Gall, who has experience and expertise in both of these questions. As an environmental engineer, he's designed stormwater control systems for large, complex problems such as ours. And as an expert witness, he's testified in relation to the Lowell Mountain wind turbine installation where an experimental stormwater control system was put in place. So he knows a great deal about it. The Lowell Mountain wind installation has 21 turbines and went into operation in October of 2012. So it's been in operation for about 3.5 years. And during that time, fortunately, Jeff has kept an eye on it. Jeff, please welcome Jeff.
Can everybody hear me?
So far, so good.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. I've never heard that anybody can't hear me. I'm pretty loud. Okay, so one of the reasons that I'm here tonight is obviously I was asked to come and talk about my past experience. As an engineer, I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Vermont, as well as a number of other states. I was hired back in 2010 to, because of client Energize Vermont was very concerned about the number of proposed ridgeline wind projects that were proposed in Vermont. And Vermont being a very small state in terms of population, it was no surprise that they asked somebody like me from out of state to come in. It was difficult, I think, probably to find somebody in state to really come out and do an evaluation and provide a critique of systems that were promoted to the highest levels in the state of Vermont. So you can understand why a guy from Jersey is up here talking to you today about, now, you're not alone in this. In New Jersey, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it, we have a lot of different energy problems, just like we do all over the country and all over the world. As a matter of fact, in New Jersey, we don't have 400 or 500 foot tall wind turbines, but we also have solar farms that are being proposed. We also are right next to one of the most prolific natural gas states in the nation, Pennsylvania. We're actually dealing with 5 different pipeline projects that are now being proposed to go through our state. And so there's a lot of normal folks out there whose properties are impacted where these pipelines are going through, and environmental groups that are very concerned about the impacts, the environmental impacts of these projects. And because one of the things I wanted to really try to get through today to everybody here is it doesn't matter whether it's a fossil fuel or it's a renewable energy or it's hydropower or nuclear. When you build these things, they're construction projects. You go in with excavators, you tear down the trees, you grade, you make it so we can get our mechanical equipment in there to build these systems. And if anybody tells you otherwise, they're lying to you. It's a construction project, and it's a massive operation. So the whole idea that I'm going to talk about is we're going to talk a little bit about that, what our energy issues are today, all the way up to the White House, and what it has for implications for you at the local level, and what kind of complications is proposed. After the Lowell project was built, I'm not a noise expert by any means, but I'm a listening expert. I got ears, so I kept hearing all these complaints about noise and things. So this was actually me. In the fall of 2013, I went up to the Nelsons. They let me camp out in the backyard, and I just wanted to sit there all night and listen and hear what I had to say and hear what the turbines sounded like. And as a listening expert, I could hear them all night. It was pretty loud. But that's not my area of expertise. All I can tell you is what I'm hearing. So what I'm going to talk about more in terms of my expertise is the water, the permitting, and the ability of the state of Vermont to be able to protect the public from degradation of water quality and flooding. And degradation of water quality is really what I'm going to be talking about in terms of the Clean Water Act. So we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Jeff,
Yes.
just I know you're not a sound expert, but in that picture, approximately how far are you away from the wind turbine?
I think the Nelsons was about a mile and a half from those turbines. What's our current dilemma? Well, I'm from New Jersey. I'm part of a coastal state. A study just came out from Rutgers University in my state that sea level rise in the last century, in the 20th century, has risen the fastest in the past 3,000 years. The Earth is changing, our climate is changing. How do they know that? A number of scientists, they went around the world, they took cores, sediment cores, they looked at ice cores, and they figured out that based on what they're finding in the fossil record and soils, that we are indeed in a time where climate change has been accelerated. There's also a study by AECOM, they're a national well-respected engineering firm, that talked about coastal and fluvial flooding. When I use the term fluvial, I mean your rivers, river flooding. And the study that they performed and the analysis that they performed around the United States, I focused in on the Northeast, the 1% recurrence interval, and I'm going to explain what the 1% recurrence interval is, as opposed to the 100-year storm event. And by the way, they're the same thing in terms of what they are. The 100-year storm event in lay terms is, hey, it's that storm that happens once every 100 years. But people say, well, why is it happening more than once every 100 years? It's because it's really not a 1 in 100-year storm event. It's what's called a 1% in probability chance of occurring at any moment in time. So for every year, there's a 1% chance you're going to get that flood event that's going to flood you out. And that's going to have that, and that's what FEMA looks into, is that 100-year event. So it's a 1% chance. So you could have a 100-year flood today, and you have the same probability of 1% of having that flood tomorrow. What they're saying is, by 2100, year 2100, and I think most of us, maybe my head will be in a jar at one point, I don't know, I want to live that long, but most of us, or probably at least most of the people in this room will not be here. In 2100, they say in the Northeast that floods, the peak flow of floods will have increased 21 to 40% in the next 100 years. Again, climate change is happening. I get it. I think we all get it. And by the way, this is in my state. This is, I believe, Manteloking, Hurricane Sandy. The storm surge came out and took out pretty much the entire town on the coast, took out the bridges, and that's a photo from Irene in Vermont. Well, what are we doing about this? And what are we doing about energy security? There's a combined effort here. We're talking about energy security and climate change. And so in 2012, President Barack Obama came out with the all of the above strategy for energy security as well as addressing climate change. They said we've got to develop every possible thing we have in this country. We have to do it. We have to keep it here. We have to keep it domestic, and that will provide economic security and control, and it'll also help us do our part for climate change. So the major emphasis, everything's discussed in there. It's, you can, whatever you're for, they talk about wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, biomass, biofuels for renewables. They're not throwing off the table natural gas and oil. And what I put in quotes is clean coal, because I'm, like that'll never happen. And then we talk about nuclear. So everything is on the table right now at the federal level. They're okay with everything. And that's actually, in my opinion, a great idea. We really need to be looking at everything. I'm very pro-renewable. We want to do things that provide the least amount of greenhouse gas emissions to control climate change. But I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. About a year later, in November 2013, they came out with an executive order from the President's office, preparing the U.S. for the impacts of climate change. What they're saying is already affecting communities, its natural resources, its ecosystems, its economics and communities. So, an executive order coming down from the highest level of government is saying, we need to protect our population, our people, our ecosystems, which is what we're going to talk a little bit about, our natural resources, and our communities from the impacts of climate change. So what they even talk about is they're going to reform their policies that perhaps unintentionally increase the vulnerability of the natural or built systems in our nation. Now the reason I'm bringing both of these up is they're in a vacuum. If you look at the two and each by themselves, they can contradict each other. What we need to do is look at these in terms of how they work with each other. And I'm going to get to that as we move along. And what I'm saying is we have competing strategies here. And I'm zooming now into the state of Vermont. The state of Vermont has two overriding goals, and I'll talk about each of these quotes in a second. You'll be able to see them when I zoom in. There's the preservation of natural resources. I've worked with the state of Vermont before. Dam removals, natural, ecosystem restoration is definitely a priority to them. There's no doubt. But there's also a Vermont renewable energy strategy, which, if not worked in the context of preservation of natural resources, is, in what my opinion is, you're getting on some of these ridgeline wind projects. So let's first go in, and nobody's going to be able to see this. I'll read it to you. This was an op-ed by your secretary, Deb Markowitz, of the Agency of Natural Resources, a year after Hurricane Irene. And what she said is we need to slow stormwater before it rushes into streams. Our steep mountain hillsides send water rushing downhill, not only during storms like Irene, but also during smaller storms. She recognizes that even smaller storms are a problem. She further goes on to say we need to ensure that floodwater has somewhere to go. Our farms, wetlands, and fields provide a place where flooding rivers can spill out and slow down. Healthy forests protect us by absorbing as much as 70% of the rain that falls before it flows overland to streams. Protecting these areas means less flood damage in our valleys, villages, and homes. Forests provide the biggest bang for your buck when you're dealing with stormwater management. Let's go over to your governor on his website. Governor Shumlin, pursuing clean energy policies in Vermont isn't just about doing what is right for our environment, protecting our unrivaled quality of life. And that's nice. A thriving clean energy sector is also integral to our economy, keeping young people in Vermont, making the state a more affordable place to live. That's why he feels very strongly that we must lead on creating a clean energy economy based on Vermont values. They're going to add 15,000 jobs in his quote on his website. So to me, the governor, it's not just about the natural resources, it's about the economy, it's about improving people's lives. Again, look at this in terms of protecting your natural resources. There's room for both. And I believe that you'll find that ridgeline wind may not be that. So, the two things that you deal with, I was telling you I'm dealing with solar and gas pipelines in New Jersey. We are dealing with also, we're still behind we're still a little bit behind on wind. They're looking to put wind in the Atlantic Ocean to provide that energy, but we're not quite there yet. But I wanted to provide two examples of what you're dealing with solar and wind and why these two examples show that there's a contradiction between the protection of your natural resources, your forests and wetlands, and renewable energy and dealing with climate change. This is a project up in Burlington, Vermont. It's called South 40 Solar. It's built, this is Lake Champlain right here. This is the project right here. You'll notice I've put in red. The solar farm actually goes this entire area right here. Everything in red is wetlands. We don't even allow this in New Jersey. But they're putting the solar farm, the poles, within the wetland. And there's a couple of numbers at the bottom when you're talking about impacts. You talk about wetland fill. If you add up all these little poles, they're like I-beams, if you ever see on a building, except they're in the ground. When you add up the area of those, and there's thousands of them in that site, within the wetland, it adds up to only about 91 square feet. Doesn't seem like a lot. Now they talk about other impacts of 52,000. It's probably likely from the shading of the solar panels and those impacts. And they say, well, they're going to be above the ground. The wetland is not going to be impacted by that. However, this is what a construction site looks like at a solar farm. I call it repeated impacts, repeated pressure from equipment. In order to put those little poles in the ground, that 91 square feet, you got to go out repeatedly with these skid steers and bang those poles into the ground. Actually, before that, you got to get out to the site. So what they'll do is they got to clear the site. You go in with bulldozers. If there's trees, you clear the trees. You go in with those types of equipment. You take that out. And all that repeated effort compacts the soil. And what ends up happening is that soil is not the same anymore. That's something that we're actually also dealing with in New Jersey from impacts on agricultural lands. When you have a construction site on an agricultural land, it forever changes the value of that agricultural soil. Through compaction, through excavation, through stripping, simply stockpiling topsoil in a pile for a period of time kills all the biological activity in those soils. It's a construction site. They're clearing it. They're putting the pole, and then they go in and they put the poles in, and that equipment leaves, and they got to keep coming back. Why? Because they have to put the panels up. So this is a typical site. This is actually an upland site from a project that I photo documented up here. And so they got to come in and put the poles in. All that material was compacted, it was cleared, they stripped the topsoil, then they came back and put the topsoil back. What you don't also see on these solar farms is they actually have to put underground piping in to get all the electrical wire and get that energy you're developing off the site. So there's actually also underground cable and wiring that actually has to go underground as well. So you're really not going it's really not 91 square feet. It's the entire wetland, for example, on that South 40 site. Here's a site, this is actually the Barton site, solar site in Vermont. And you can see during construction, soil was compacted, there was a significant amount of runoff. There is a significant amount of impact. Again, I'm not telling you that solar is bad. I'm telling you that if you're going to build these projects, you've got to accept them for what they are. One of the things that I wanted to bring up on the solar farm, and I'm going to go back to wind, study done at the University of Maryland. It was called the hydrologic response of solar farms. It was a model that was completed. They were concerned about, and the reason, let me back up a little bit. In New Jersey, they passed a law that solar panels cannot be counted as impervious cover. In other words, as an engineer, I'm not allowed to design a solar field and take into account the solar panels. Now, by law, I have to assume that the only impervious cover I have are the poles and other pertinent structures associated with it. I can't count the panels. They are elevated, and this study shows that in one sense, it's not a bad law, and in another sense, it's a terrible law. The reason being is the study that they performed at the University of Maryland, they looked at what happens if we have elevated solar panels, and rain hits them, runs off. What does that do to peak flows and peak volumes of stormwater? What they found is if all else equal, in other words, you put the panels up, and the vegetation is maintained exactly as it was before the solar panels were up, the peak flows and increased volume is almost negligible. Good thing. Except, I just talked about how much the soil gets compacted, how much the land gets modified. And by the way, when they come in and say, oh, don't worry about it, we're going to till it up. How are they going to till it up? How are they going to go underneath these panels when they're installed to till the soils? And when they have the piping and the cables underground, the electrical cable, how are they going to till that up and restore the soil without damaging their infrastructure? The reality is they're not. So what the study found is when you start getting bare spots and you start getting areas where they start losing vegetation, the peak flows and the volumes go up significantly, leading to erosion and all kinds of other issues associated with degradation of water quality. I bring that up because I know that Vermont is struggling equally as much with solar and other forms of energy as much as wind. But that's something that is also, we're going to talk a little bit about wind projects. Okay, so what we're going to talk about now is Lowell Kingdom Community Wind. This is a project that's near and dear to my heart. I was involved with this project for several years. I've walked the mountain before it was built. I was dragged through what they call the civil type litigation of an appeal. Our client spent, between us and other experts and lawyers, about $400,000 in appealing the stormwater permit. Once it gets to that point, it becomes all about lawyers and going back and forth with the experts and a long project and a long process. Lowell Kingdom Community Wind, 21 turbines at 63 megawatts. It was about 7 miles of new roads. They installed what are called, they installed 52 stormwater structures. In other words, 52, and I'll explain what a level spreader is, but 52 different types of structures that had to manage stormwater in some form of or another. Ponds, level spreaders, you name it. There's also what they call 50 manner of discharge points, and they basically, in order to show compliance, they have to model the streams in the area and figure out, what the impacts are. And they have certain modeling targets for that. And what they did at Lowell is they did what they wanted. Their claim was they wanted to do the minimum impact on the environment that they could. So what they said is we're going to use these level spreaders. The level spreaders are not an accepted form of stormwater management currently for the state of Vermont. The state of Vermont, through legislation and technical people, have what's called the Vermont Stormwater Management Manual. A lot of states have them. They basically provide performance standards to reduce peak flows from flooding, protect water quality, and protect stream channel stability. And there's typical types where you drive down the road, you might, in an urban area, you'll see a detention basin, like a big hole in the ground, looks like a crater. That's a stormwater basin. That's actually an accepted form of stormwater management in the Vermont Stormwater Management Manual. And the problem here is that if you built all these stormwater basins, at least according to the applicant, is we were going to disturb much more land. We're going to have to build all these big basins, and we're going to have to. It's going to make much more. It's going to have much more of a requirement for land clearing. So what we're going to do is less. So what we're going to do is not put in those basins. We're going to put in these things called level spreaders. And level spreaders are basically. It's right here. They're built of rock. They're level, and they spread. Makes pretty much sense, right? They're called. So water comes off the roads. It goes into these little tiny ponded areas. It rises up, and it flows over the level spreader. And what it's supposed to do is take rainfall that hits those impervious areas and concentrates on the road, goes down to these level spreaders, and the water will rise up, just like on a table. Just, I've seen them say, oh, it's going to be as level as this table right here. And the water will go back to sheet flow and recreate the sheet flow of these systems. The fatal flaw of these systems, though, is if they're not exactly level, then stormwater flows much faster and you get erosion and you get higher peak flows. They actually have, I believe it's 32 of these up on Lowell Mountain. What really happens is, over time, and you're dealing with Vermont winters, that's a little close-up of it, you're dealing with Vermont winters and weathering and erosion already on these level spreaders, and what ends up happening is it doesn't flow level. As a matter of fact, it's so not level that the vegetation is already grown here. I believe this was taken in 2013, over a year after the site was built. And you'll see that it's focusing, the water's flowing right here. So it's actually not going off the site as sheet flow. It's going as concentrated flow and going over the land. And it's going down the hill, and because it's closer together and it's not sheet flow, it doesn't have as much contact with the ground surface, so the ground can't slow it down and it goes faster. So the question then becomes, they modeled it as sheet flow, but is it really flowing as sheet flow? Now, during the appeal process, we argued that the 150 feet that they say this was going to flow as sheet flow, based on their 20 to 30% slopes, by all the literature, wasn't going to happen. And it's not happening. And is evident by these level spreaders here. So the peak flows of these systems are not that easy. And keep in mind, there's 52 stormwater devices on this site they have to manage.
How do they manage them?
I don't know. I'm not allowed on the site. They won't let me.
How are they appropriately managed?
You probably have to tend to them every time there's a storm event. I heard you get high school kids go in and clean them out every once in a while. That's the stories I've heard. You have to keep leveling them out. Keep in mind, though, every time one blows out, its sediment goes somewhere, right? The material from that level spreader goes somewhere. But it's all right, they replenish it. So now you have a continuous load of sediment. Now I'm going to show you a video. And it's going to show a little bit about how, and I'm standing right now in one of the wetlands. This is the northern site of, the northernmost area of the site, of the turbine site. It was like, I think it was near T1. Off the property, it was downhill of the one level spreader. And according to their calculations, that flow was going to go as level spreader, very sheet flow, you know, a few inches thick, evenly to that wetland. Let's see if it comes up here. By the way, I'm
just about northeast from Tower T1.
Oh, by the way, those aren't jets flying over my head. That's T1. That's turbine 1 that you can hear. Again, I'm no noise expert, but I'm a listening expert.
The path of level spreader LSC1, and there's erosion where it shows that the water starts to reconcentrate.
This is in the fall of 2013.
Into a path. I'll need to check the calculations to see where it is, but it looks like it's all starting to reconcentrate. I'm going to measure this off. I'm guessing it's about 100 to 200 yards downstream from level spreader LSC1.
Let's see if I can, look a little bit blurry here. What's happening is, where I was standing was in the wetland, and you'll see there's a little, I call it a head cut, starting to form. And that happens when stormwater starts to concentrate, starts to convert from sheet flow and creating rills and those types of erosion. So what happens is that will now continue until it comes to an equilibrium. But I found evidence on this site that it is not flowing as they modeled it. It is concentrating. And what that will do, and unfortunately they're not monitoring that at all, is what will that do to floodwaters and the peak flow reductions on that site. One of the issues, and this is where I'm going to talk about, I really personally, it's my professional opinion that the Agency of Natural Resources does not have the resources to enforce these permits. These projects are big. They're big and they have a lot of stormwater controls associated with them. And so that's enough already for the wind developer to maintain these structures. And I put this up here that regulations are only as good as enforcement. And really what gets to the heart of the matter for me is condition 14 of the Lowell Stormwater Permit. The reason being is when we talked about those, I talked about those alternate systems that are not in the manual, but they use them here. They're allowed to use them, but they have to complete a study for a period of time after construction to show that they work. So in other words, they're allowed to install them. There's no pilot test. They're allowed to install them by the manual on a project scale. And they have to monitor them. And if they don't work, the Agency of Natural Resources then comes back in and says, they're not working. You have to build those accepted stormwater systems. Or they might say it's working, it's fine. You're meeting all the quality standards and everything else. So guess what? Once it's approved for one project and the study is approved, it's now an accepted practice. Even if it's not in the manual, if they have data to show that they work. Perfectly sane and logical way to evolve with the changing technology of stormwater management. And what gets to the heart of the matter is when my client appealed this permit, the Public Service Board said, now hold on a second. They said they're going to monitor these things. So what's your problem? If they don't work, they're going to have to build those big new systems. They're going to have to build those big basins. The issue is they haven't done it yet. As a matter of fact, a year after they were done with construction, they were supposed to start this 3-year study. And that was in 2014. It was 2016, and as of February of 2016, no studies have been accomplished yet. How do I know this? I did a Public Records Act request. I got all the documents. As a matter of fact, I asked for just Condition 14 documents. They said, I'll tell you what, let me give you everything, because it's a lot to go through. So I do have literally everything that they have associated with the Lowell operational stormwater permit. And right as of, at least as of February, early February, when I got these documents, they hadn't even started the study. There were emails going back and forth. They basically said, you know, a person from A&R said to the consultant for Green Mountain Power, where's your plan, where's your plan, where's your plan? And they kept saying, there was one in April of 2015 that says, we're still working on it, we're still trying to pick these level spreaders, we're still trying to find them. The next email was actually January of 2016, 8 months later. A&R sent a nearly identical email out and says, where's this study? Where's the plan to do these studies? And so, I don't know, maybe when I asked them for this information, maybe that triggered them. I don't know, maybe they're in the process of doing it right now. The problem is their permit expires in August of this year. The permits for these systems, this individual permit, was 5 years. Time enough to build a project, implement a study, determine whether these level spreaders are working or not, and these what I call experimental systems, and then determine whether they should reissue a new individual permit or require the applicant, Green Mountain Power, to build systems that are acceptable. Hasn't happened yet. Hasn't happened. I have no idea why. I'm not going to get into either politics or the staffing resources or anything else at the Agency of Natural Resources. But for some reason, it hasn't started yet. And guess what? Deerfield is going to start construction very soon. The Public Service Board, as I understand, is very close to issuing their construction approvals to start. They have these exact same level spreaders. They have the same systems. No monitoring has started yet on this site.
Jeff, when were they supposed to have begun this study?
What it states here is the operational phase of stormwater management alternative design and performance monitoring plan prepared by VHB dated 9/20/2010. 2010, by the way. They had a plan in place in 2010 before they even got the permit. Right now they just need to pick the level spreaders. And last revised in December of 2010, shall not commence until the new design alternative treatment system has been in place for 1 full year from the date of construction. The consultant even put further that said, and by the way, the Vermont Stormwater Management Manual says you have to complete your study within 3 years. And the consultant went further to say in their application of that plan, we're going to do this study over the course of 3 years. So it was going to be a 3-year study. So right now, A&R has no information to make a determination on whether or not that permit should be renewed. Will they renew it? I don't know. I hear yeah, probably. What are they going to do? But the fact of the matter is, they have no data right now. Now, you're going to hear things. They're going to probably see this presentation. They're going to say, we're monitoring this project. Part of our water quality certificate, our showing of compliance with the Clean Water Act that's issued with the stormwater permits, we've already got monitoring stations downstream from this project. They even have one up at Sheffield. Except all those points, those areas that they're monitoring, minimum 1,000 feet downstream, a couple miles. Sheffield, I think I even measured one that was like 2 or 3 miles downstream. So they're not monitoring these sites at the point of discharge, and by the way, at the regulated waters that run right all the way up to these discharge points. They're monitoring thousands of feet downstream. To me, that's not showing compliance with Condition 14 that's in the permit. And to me, they're not in compliance with the stormwater permit. If A&R has not enforced it, A&R as a delegated agency from the United States Environmental Protection Agency to manage stormwater, and the Clean Water Act are not in compliance with that, and therefore the A&R could conceivably be in violation of the Clean Water Act at this point in time. We talked a lot about this in general in Vermont and a lot about a lot of the issues at hand. Why is it important to the people in this room in Windham and Grafton? Right now, there's, I guess it's 28 turbines, 96 megawatt facility that's being proposed here between these two towns. It's a much bigger facility than Lowell. It's bigger than Deerfield. It's definitely much bigger than Sheffield. So one of the things that I did get, I obtained, I went online, there was a press release about, I think Iberdrola came in and they had a map, showed where all these turbines are going. So I used those, I overlaid on in GIS and Google Earth, located all the turbines. I think I'm pretty close to where these turbines should be. But one of the things that's not showing up that I think is important for the people in this room to know is that it's just not turbines, it's not these poles that are going to the ground with these turbines going in. They have to get in there. They have to get in there and build them. They need access roads. We talk about Lowell having 7 miles of access roads and crane paths. So I put in some hypothetical crane access roads that would essentially go over to 121 over by Saxon River. Logically, you probably want to pass through, I think this is Townsend Road, down the South Branch to go through. When you add up that red line and all these access, and I didn't even put the access to like individual turbines, but it's 10 miles. We'd have 10 miles of brand new road in those mountains up there. 10 miles of now, they may come back and maybe the defense is, it's not 10 miles of road, it's 8 miles. You know, okay, it's 8 miles. You know, whatever it might be. My calculation is it's 10 miles. 10 miles of new road to access all these turbines because you need cranes, you need trucks, you need very large equipment to deliver this equipment to these sites. This is the reality. This is not for or against. This is what you have to do. You need large cranes to get these sites built. So I prorated that to Lowell. We engineers sometimes have to extrapolate. So what I did is I said, okay, Lowell's got 52 stormwater control features, 50 discharge points. What does that mean to Windham and Grafton? Well, what it means is based on just a direct extrapolation, it means you're going to have 71 discharge and compliance points and 74 stormwater structures to manage on this site. So you're not going to have to manage and go by each and every one of these stormwater sites every year, every storm, every time it happens to make sure they're all functioning in accordance with the modeling that they perform. Because if they don't, it means number one, they're in violation of the permit, but number two, downstream you're paying for it. You're not reducing peak flows and you're getting degradation of water quality. This is just a little bit of I was just trying to get a sense for myself of the topography. So this is a cross section going through it based on the available topo maps. You've got Grafton down here and Windham over here. One of the things I wanted to talk about too is I reviewed, there's a storm back in 1996 in Grafton. They talked of the Grafton, Vermont flood, although it seemed to be it was along a lot of the ridgeline areas in this area. But it was a NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, technical report on the 12 to 13 June 1996 flood. Obviously, it was a series of thunderstorms. I don't really have to give people too much of a history. I think we're all probably painfully aware of that flood. There were many road washouts. There was 8 to 9 inches of rain in 2 days. The interesting thing for me as the engineer that caught my eye was what they say causes the storms, which are actually pretty prevalent in the Green Mountains and probably a lot of different mountain range systems, where the mountains actually are perpendicular to the flow of the weather patterns. They call it a convergent upslope flow. What that does is as the weather, as moisture-laden weather comes in from the west, it hits the mountains, it's forced up, and it starts to squeeze the water out. And so what you end up getting is these cells that form, all these black dots here, are all the cells that had formed during some of that radar from that 96 storm event. They come up and they cause rain to fall, especially up on ridge lines. You've got Glebe Mountain over here to the west,
And this dashed area, this map was provided to me, this dashed area shows the property where the wind turbines are going. So moisture would then come in here, be forced up by Glebe Mountain, and pour down into this watershed here, and down to the Saxton River tributaries, and then down into Grafton, and then Wyndham over here to the tributaries over there. Why is that important? Because we're putting 10 miles of road right where the water falls, right the steepest part of the watershed. And that's where a lot of these projects are going. Of course, that's where the wind is.
Yeah.
It's a trade-off. Yes. So, I did promise them when I came to talk I wouldn't keep you guys all night, but one of the things is I came to several conclusions based on all this information. First of all, Vermont has yet to enforce the provisions of the study protocols for Kingdom Community Wind. Condition 14 is not met. Why that's important for you is it's not met for Kingdom Community Wind. They still have to now enforce it for Deerfield. I don't know what kind of stormwater controls they're going to propose for Grafton, Wyndham. But regardless, the A&R apparently is not enforcing that condition. And we're concerned, I am concerned as a professional, as these projects grow and we get more and more of them, urban water quality degradation doesn't happen from one project. I call it death by 1,000 cuts. It happens over time. The more projects that are built, the more the water quality degrades. The problem is once it degrades, it's very hard to reverse because you have all these 1,000 cuts. So I say the success of the experiment at Lowell is in question. None of the monitoring protocols in Condition 14 are enforced. I further say that none of the conditions in the permit that was issued at all address flooding. None of the conditions try to look at these, like for example, level spreaders to say, are they even functioning from a flood attenuation standpoint? They're just looking at water quality from the Clean Water Act standpoint, which actually they're not doing. Grafton Wyndham would almost be 50% larger than KCW, Kingdom Community Wind. With an estimated 10 miles of road, Grafton is subject to severe flooding already with those convergent upslope-induced storms typical of the Green Mountains. One of the other things that I wanted to point out that's very interesting is we're building these projects to address climate change. Yet none of them have incorporated climate change in their designs. In other words, the stormwater systems, matter of fact, Lowell, the stormwater system for Lowell, the rainfall distributions they use for Lowell, and for Sheffield for that matter, and probably actually for Deerfield now, were from the 1960s. They just upgraded, NOAA actually just within the last couple of months for New England just updated their rainfall data. None of them incorporate the impact of climate change on the projects themselves. So in other words, these stormwater systems are built, and they'll tell you otherwise, they're built to the minimum standard, they met the minimum requirements of the law for peak flow, attenuation, and design anyway, and water quality treatment. Yet, in 20 years, when you start getting increased rainfall events, will those stormwater features function? If the predictions are correct, the answer is no. And so how will these systems function at that point to protect downstream in compliance with the Clean Water Act? It means they're going to have to go in and retrofit a lot of these systems, which is going to be a very expensive endeavor. But there's not even a mechanism in place to trigger that at this point in time. I was involved in the, I attended the, in the last couple of years they've been updating the Vermont Stormwater Management Manual. They just issued the draft volume 1 of it, which talks about performance standards. Nowhere in that manual, in the new one, 2016, does it address climate change. It doesn't address anything about climate change. It talks about using existing stormwater runoff information, and that's it. So with that said, I'll take some questions, and I'll be obviously here for a little bit of time as well. So, yeah.